I'm a doctor working at a certain hospital. Let's say my name is Emily Johnson. Born into a family of doctors that goes back generations. It was decided from my childhood that I would become a doctor. My father, grandfather, and even great-grandfather were all doctors. I grew up in a household filled with doctors, including uncles and cousins. Although I essentially became a doctor under compulsion, I liked the job and had thought of it as my career. I found fulfillment in curing patients' diseases and being thanked for it, which motivated me to continue working as a doctor for several years. However, at some point, I started becoming interested in research work. Research work, in this context, means drug development, investigating the causes and treatments of diseases, and then developing them into drugs. I got deeply fascinated by such research. Indeed, it seemed more efficient in some ways. While I can only attend to a limited number of patients myself, developing a drug could potentially save many more lives, which drew me deeper into research. I continued my research, with my job at the hospital taking a backseat. My father showed interest in my research and even provided me with a facility that was not in use, to be used as my laboratory. I was truly grateful to my understanding father, and so, I continued with my research. However, in the research community, it's not uncommon to see sabotage among colleagues. There were stories of supposed allies turning out to be spies for rival researchers or trusted colleagues betraying you by publishing your research results as their own. Being recognized for your research could make you famous, and some people wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to achieve that. It's that kind of industry. That's why I didn't trust people outside my family much. Of course, since my father and relatives were also researchers, I didn't talk freely about my research. Confidentiality was integral to research. Despite such an environment, my family was still my place of solace. I couldn't talk about my research, but I could casually mention things like, I haven't been sleeping much lately or I'm feeling stuck. Having someone to talk to about such things was truly important. I knew people who had secluded themselves in their lab, doing nothing but research, but it seemed like they were becoming increasingly odd as a person. That's why I think it's crucial to go outside and talk to different people. I am researching diseases related to gynecology. Of course, finding a treatment could help many people, but it hasn't been easy. I've gone through numerous trials and errors, compiling research results. It's been a repetitive process of mundane tasks. The treatment isn't immediately tested on humans. Observing the effects starts with animals. However, animal testing didn't yield results, leading to days of searching for answers. Even when I felt confident, the outcomes were not always positive, and research is a time-consuming job. There were times when I felt like giving up, but I also felt hopeful with each small progress. But my job wasn't my only source of stress. There was also the presence of Dr. Black, another researcher working on the same disease. In this line of work, you have colleagues all over the country. It's crucial to publish your results before your rivals to be acknowledged for your achievements. But Dr. Black was different. He used various methods to interfere with my research. Dr. Black and I were like classmates, having learned from the same mentor. We competed academically since our student days, and we both had a passionate commitment to our current research. Our mentor used to say, I wonder who will find the treatment first, and indeed, both Dr. Black and I were expected to achieve this. Being competitive, having a rival made me more dedicated, but I've always felt that Dr. Black looked down on me. He would say things like,
Research isn't a woman's job. It's fine now because you're a student, but a female researcher won't be of any use in the real world. Women should just stay home and cook.
Loudly in my presence. Dr. Black's entourage, too, was grinning and looking our way as he made such outdated remarks about men and women. I thought to myself, I really don't want to associate with people who still talk about gender in such an old-fashioned way. Even among brilliant researchers and doctors, there are plenty of odd ones. Discrimination against homosexuals or women wasn't rare, but I hadn't been paying it much mind. However, Such behavior escalated over time. Equipment I used for research was found broken. Mysterious liquids were spread around the lab, requiring time for cleaning, and such incidents happened one after another. And finally, there was a mysterious fire incident at the lab. It happened just as I was about to head to the hospital where I work. I couldn't show my face at the lab for about 2 days, so I left the work to my colleagues there. While I was handling my duties at the hospital, I received a call from a staff member at the lab.
Miss Johnson, it's terrible. There was a fire at the lab. We're not sure what happened. We weren't using any fire,
came the panicked voice over the phone. Understood. I'll head back to the lab right away. I hung up and immediately went to the lab. When I arrived, there was a fire truck parked in front, and they were conducting firefighting activities. It seemed to have been a minor fire, as only a few were putting it out with fire extinguishers.
Oh, Miss Johnson, I'm sorry about this.
Are you okay? Any injuries?
Yes, but this happened while I briefly went to the bathroom. I'm sorry.
But there wasn't supposed to be anything that could start a fire, right? What could have happened?
It looks like there were signs that the fire at this spot was started on purpose. There was something like a lit flyer.
On purpose? Who would do such a thing? While saying this, Dr. Black's face somehow floated into my mind. Could it be Dr. Black? Surely not. Even though he had been obstructing my research, a mistake could have been dangerous. Would Dr. Black do something like that? I wondered with suspicion. Later, with a possibility of arson, the police arrived. They asked if I had any suspects in mind, but of course, I didn't mention Dr. Black's name. Sigh. It's been quite a series of events lately. After the police left, I stayed at the lab, exhausted. There was a gathering of researchers the next day, and I had to prepare the necessary documents. I decided to stay at the still smoky lab to prepare the documents before heading home. Even then, I couldn't stop thinking about who did it and why this had happened. The next day, I went to the designated meeting room on time. While preparing the documents and waiting for everyone to arrive, Dr. Black showed up. As soon as he arrived in the meeting room, he said,
"Well, everyone, did you make sure to lock up the lab properly? I checked for any fire hazards. It would be a disaster if a fire were to start."
I was startled and looked at Dr. Black. Then, for some reason, Dr. Black was grinning at me. Could it really have been Dr. Black yesterday? I couldn't believe it. I had never imagined that a fellow researcher, even a rival, would go this far. Deep down, I suspected it was Dr. Black's doing, but with no evidence, I couldn't report it to the police. There was nothing I could do but swallow my tears. Why would this happen? Honestly, I was shocked. Even if I wanted to retaliate, I didn't want to stoop to doing the same as Dr. Black. Besides, with the minor fire incident and all the chaos, I had a conference to attend, and there was no room for anything else. It was a precious opportunity to have our research seen and receive feedback. I was determined to attend no matter what. With only a month left until the conference, I was busy compiling the research results. I thought of outdoing them with my research someday, working hard with all my might. And then, a month later, the day of the conference arrived. I had arrived the day before and stayed at a hotel near the venue. I made sure not to be late or get delayed by traffic. I was determined to do my best for that day. Waking up earlier than usual to grab breakfast, I was all psyched up as I left the hotel for the venue. The conference venue was within walking distance from the hotel. Here, I've got plenty of time, I thought as I walked, when I noticed a small crowd had formed up ahead on the street. What's going on? I wondered, approaching out of curiosity, only to find a woman collapsed on the ground. She seemed to be clutching her chest in distress. Could she be having a sudden illness? Instinctively, I moved toward the woman, as I always would. But then, I felt something was off, despite appearing to be struggling to breathe. Something about her condition just didn't seem right. Normally, people with breathing difficulties turn red or their fingertips turn blue. But this woman showed none of those signs. She was just lying on the ground, Moreover, if she had suddenly fallen ill, it wouldn't be odd for her shoes to come off or her clothes to get dirty when she collapsed. However, this woman's appearance was undisturbed, and she almost seemed to be sitting on the ground politely. It also struck me as odd that she was holding onto her bag despite appearing to be in pain. You wouldn't expect someone to worry about their bag in such a situation. Something was off. Normally, I'd rush to aid someone showing signs of sudden illness without a second thought, but in this instance, I found myself hesitating. All the while, the woman, still appearing to be in pain, looked at me and said, "Please help me." Hearing her voice, I was convinced this wasn't a case of sudden illness. Why would she be doing this? If she was really struggling to breathe, her voice would be strained, but her voice sounded perfectly normal. It seemed unlikely she was suddenly ill. She must be hiding something. My instincts told me so. That's when I noticed something. This woman had a congenital ear deformity. A congenital ear deformity refers to people born with an unusual outer ear shape, occurring during their time in the womb, and the types of deformity vary. The woman lying on the street had a split earlobe on her right ear. Seeing the shape of her ear, I decided not to help her. I decided not to help because it reminded me of something that happened one day, years ago, at a gathering of researchers. Dr. Black had said something like this:
My wife has an ear deformity. Keeps nagging me about getting surgery. It's just a split earlobe, but she complains about not being able to wear earrings.
He was talking about this with his entourage, and I happened to overhear it. Considering ear deformities aren't that common, and split earlobes even less, so it made me think the woman who had collapsed might be Dr. Black's wife. After all, it wouldn't be strange for Dr. Black's wife to be here since Dr. Black was attending the conference too. Ignoring the woman who asked for help, I headed to the conference venue.
Really? You've got to be kidding.
I heard the woman's voice behind me. She seemed to have expected me to help. If she was genuinely ill, I figured someone else would call an ambulance. Even if I would normally rush to aid someone in distress, something about this situation told me to stay away. Even as I awaited my turn at the conference, I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. Was she really Dr. Black's wife? If so, why would she do something like that? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. At the time, I could only guess that Dr. Black was trying to interfere again. What bothered me was that Dr. Black hadn't attended the conference. He was supposed to be there that day, given that we were working on the same research. It made me wonder if something had happened to him, despite all the harassment I had experienced from him. I acknowledged his capabilities as a colleague and thought he was a talented individual. I never imagined he'd miss an opportunity like this. Thanks to my diligent preparation, the conference was a great success. I received valuable feedback that will be useful for my future research. It felt like a significant accomplishment. Then, it was time to head back. Feeling relieved after completing my presentation at the conference, I felt quite drained. These past few months have been incredibly busy, so it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I planned to head back to the hotel immediately and take a leisurely return to the lab the next day, perhaps doing some sightseeing along the way. As I left the venue, the path from the venue to the hotel was different this time. It was noisily crowded with media personnel, and many housewives were chatting on the street. There were also police cars parked nearby in a parking lot. I wondered if something had happened. With this sense of unease, I arrived at the hotel. Back in my room, I turned on the TV somewhat mindlessly, only to be met with unbelievable news. What? This place is. The live news broadcast showed the location where the woman who appeared to be suddenly ill had collapsed earlier. Apparently, a woman was arrested there for concealing a knife. A knife. Could it be? I had a bad feeling about this. Thinking back, the woman at that location who had collapsed. What's going on? As I continued to watch the news, the announcer read out the name of the arrested woman. Her last name was the same as Dr. Black's. Furthermore, she was reported to have possessed the knife with the intention of stabbing someone she considered a nuisance. Hearing the word nuisance, I realized something. Could this person have intended to stab me? Thinking about it, everything seemed to fall into place. At that moment, the woman didn't look unwell at all, and it was strange how she asked me, a stranger, for help. Why would she seek help from me specifically among all the people around unless I was her target? The sound of panic in her voice when I walked away must have been because things didn't go as she expected. Soon after, emergency services must have been called, and her concealed knife was discovered. The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that her target was me. Dr. Black must have planned to use his wife to injure me, preventing me from attending the conference. He tried to get in my way again. Feeling threatened, I decided not to stay at the hotel and returned to the lab that day instead. I informed the lab staff about the incidents and instructed them to heighten security for future visitors. So please be cautious about anyone related to Dr. Black. You might become a victim as well.
That's quite a situation. Understood. I'll be careful.
Though I had filed a report about the arson incident a few days ago, the perpetrator had not yet been found. For future security, I had installed several small cameras around the lab. At the same time, I decided to confront Dr. Black directly, though I had considered him a rival. This was now criminal behavior. I wanted to stop Dr. Black from interfering with me before things escalated further. However, Dr. Black has been conspicuously absent from researchers' gatherings. He's probably waiting for the heat to die down after his wife's arrest, I thought, but even after 2 weeks, and then a month passed, there was no sign of Dr. Black. Feeling somewhat intimidated by the idea of confronting him at his lab, I decided to ask a doctor who regularly interacted with Dr. Black. What I learned then was shocking. Shockingly, Dr. Black had been diagnosed with cancer a year ago. By the time it was discovered, it was already at stage 4, and he was given a terminal prognosis. His recent absence from conferences and gatherings was due to his deteriorating health. Since medical personnel were allowed to visit, I immediately went to the hospital where Dr. Black was admitted. After explaining the situation, I was quickly led to his room. Entering the room, I saw Dr. Black, who had become so thin he looked like a different person.
Why are you here, Dr. Johnson? It's a nuisance. Just go back. Dr. Black spat at me with his usual harshness.
But there was something I had to confirm. Dr. Black, were you behind the fire at our lab?
I don't know what you're talking about. What is it?
The woman arrested during the conference, she's your wife, isn't she? Or am I wrong?
What do you want to say? Just spit it out.
It was you who has been hindering my research, right? After I laid out all my farts, Dr. Black grinned and said,
Ha, finally caught on, have you? Really? You're so slow. Yes, I did it.
Why would you go to such lengths?
Because I found out I had cancer. I thought I'd interfere with you as much as possible to advance my own research. If my wife hadn't messed up, you'd be dead by now. Truly, a useless wife.
You tried to have your wife kill me. What are you thinking? Isn't it our job to save lives?
All that noble talk is irrelevant. If the drug is developed, it brings in a huge amount of money. I'm doing this research for the money.
What are you saying?
Well, even without hindering you, my lab's drug is almost complete. Once it's recognized, I'll become a famous researcher. You won't even come close to me. Too bad for you. Serves you right.
I was completely appalled to realize Dr. Black was only thinking of his own profit, with no regard for human life. The thought of him being willing to sacrifice lives for his research sent chills down my spine. It made me wonder if knowing his life was ending soon led to such drastic actions. I felt that reasoning with Dr. Black was futile. I gave up trying to convince him and decided to simply watch over quietly. I'll consult the police if anything else happens, I said as I left the room. That was all I could manage. Seeing Dr. Black's sickly condition, I had no desire for revenge, and it was clear that he didn't have much longer. It might sound harsh, but I thought that once Dr. Black was gone, the harassment would stop too, so I decided to step back. A few months later, Dr. Black passed away. The nearly finished new drug he spoke of was to be taken over by his lab staff, but it never reached completion and was shelved. After Dr. Black's death, his entourage betrayed him, attempting to use the drug for their own benefit. However, it ended up unrecognized due to its efficacy not being well acknowledged. In other words, it was a failed strategy. Despite Dr. Black's efforts to sabotage me, his drug was never created, and now he was gone. I felt that was punishment enough. Had Dr. Black lived, he might have regretted all his efforts. Interestingly, Dr. Black's wife was released on a hefty bail, but she continued her extravagant spending on luxury goods and international travel, seemingly unaffected by her husband's death. Eventually, she got caught up with a host and squandered what remained of Dr. Black's fortune, leaving her with significant debt and pursued by dubious individuals. Even without money, she couldn't adjust her spending habits and now lives modestly while working nights, I heard. She's in considerable debt, and there are rumors of shady men chasing her. Despite everything, I'm still experimenting and taking on new challenges in my research. Dreaming of the day my work becomes a medication, I keep pushing forward.